Hey folks, just wanted to share a chilling experience I had a few years back. It gives me shivers every time Halloween rolls around. I'm John, and I've been a bit of a loner for the majority of my life. Currently in my late 70s, I've led a pretty secluded life, especially since my adopted daughter Jess and I lost touch years ago. My friend Jack is about the only person who occasionally drops by to share a drink. We've known each other since we were kids, but the only thing we really had in common was our love for whiskey and a mutual crush on Grace, a girl from our high school days. Though it was me who had the chance with her, I missed it when I left for a study program in Russia. By the time I got back, she was married, not to Jack, but to someone else. As you can imagine, Grace and I never reconnected. Fast forward to the present, and my life's pretty much dwindled down to solitary days and evenings, spent reminiscing over a drink. Electricity has been cut off for ages, and the only light in my house at night comes from a candle. Honestly, I don't even celebrate any of the festive holidays anymore, except for Halloween. It's got a poignant significance to me for reasons I'd rather forget. So, on one particularly cold evening as Halloween was approaching, I found myself out at the local store. It's a struggle these days, but I somehow managed to pick up the essentials: cheese, black coffee, candles, and occasionally bread. The world seems to have forgotten about me, and even the cashier looks through me as if I'm not there. Anyway, I noticed the Halloween decorations and, on a whim, grabbed a bag of assorted fruit candies, Tom's favorites. Tom was my grandson, Jess's boy, who tragically died in a car accident while trick-or-treating one snowy Halloween night. Jess passed away shortly after from grief, leaving me completely isolated. Returning home that night, with the candles casting long shadows across the room, I couldn't shake off a feeling of eerie anticipation. Pouring myself a drink, I tried to ignore it, until a knock at the door jolted me from my thoughts. Assuming it was trick-or-treaters, I hesitated before deciding to answer. But when I opened the door, there was just one kid standing there, dressed eerily similar to Tom, complete with a baseball cap marked with a big T. Without waiting for an invite, the kid entered, his eyes scanning the dimly light room. He spotted the candies and asked if he could have them, his bright blue eyes sparkling with excitement. I was too stunned to reply, memories of Tom flooding back as I filled his pockets with sweets. As the kid ate, a mix of fear and joy overwhelmed me. For a moment, I felt an intense connection, but then reality kicked in. I asked him about his family, and he implied he'd always wanted to visit my house despite his mom's warnings. The situation felt surreal, and without another word, the kid ran out into the night, urging me to follow him. We wound through the streets, eventually arriving at a cemetery. Confused and tired, I lost sight of him, only to find a bottle of bourbon, my drink of choice, lying next to a tombstone with my name on it and a note from Silly Jack, reminding me of an old joke we shared about drinking whiskey after death. I returned home, the night's events feeling like a bizarre dream. The encounter with the boy and the sight at the graveyard left me with an unsettling blend of sorrow and confusion. Now, every Halloween, I can't help but wonder about the thin line between the living and the dead, and the mysterious ways our loved ones might choose to remind us they're never truly gone. It's just another chapter in an old man's life, but it's a reminder that sometimes life can be stranger than fiction. This one night, I had one too many at the local pub. By the time I decided to head home, my legs were barely taking orders from my brain. To get back to my place, I had to cross this old bridge that goes over the creek near my house. Before the city built this bridge, folks used to hop across using some hefty stones lined up in the water, kind of a makeshift pathway. One evening, it had been pouring like the heavens opened a faucet. The creek was swelling, and those stepping stones were nowhere in sight. The only way across was wading through the cold, rushing water. Now, this particular night, after a long session at the pub, as I was about to step into the water, I felt something or someone tug at my jacket. Turning around, slightly annoyed and ready to give someone a piece of my mind, I found myself staring at a woman. She was, oddly enough, dressed in a striking red dress, quite out of place for such a grim and soggy night. She looked up at me, eyes wide with apprehension, and asked if I could carry her across the creek. She was afraid of the water, she said. Now, me being in no condition to balance myself, let alone carry someone, scoffed at the idea. But there was something about her pleading eyes that didn't sit right with me, especially after encountering her night after night. Each time I staggered back home. After a few days of this recurring encounter, curiosity got the better of me. I decided to stay a bit more sober one evening and took a precautionary measure. I pocketed a piece of red string. That night, just as expected, I met her by the creek. Only this time, I agreed to carry her across. Before stepping into the water, I slipped off my shoes and shoved them into my pockets, then hoisted her onto my back. Midway through the creek, I sneakily tied the red string around us. When we finally made it to the other side, and after a few steps onto solid ground, she softly asked me to let her down. Ignoring her pleas, I kept walking, determined to confront whatever this was head-on. As we approached the edge of my neighborhood, signaled by the distant barking of dogs, she turned sinister. She threatened to scare me to death if I didn't release her immediately. I powered through, refusing to look back, despite her increasingly frantic struggles. Suddenly, she ordered me to look at her. When I reluctantly glanced over my shoulder, what I saw nearly stopped my heart. Her head had grotesquely swollen to an enormous size, and a long red tongue flailed from her mouth. Despite the sheer terror, I somehow maintained my composure and continued walking. By the time I reached my house, the thrashing had ceased. With trembling hands, I set my load down, only to find a rotting piece of a wooden coffin on my back instead of a woman. The next day, I consulted with someone knowledgeable about these things. They suggested burning the wood with tung oil to destroy whatever malice lingered. As it turned out, the rains had disturbed an old grave, washing the coffin's lid into the creek. Had I not intervened, who knows what malice could have been unleashed. It's a night I'll never forget. True story, or a brisk walk through madness. I'll let you be the judge. It's always the stuff you brush off as coincidences or your imagination running wild that sticks with you, right? Well, let me tell you about what happened to me. Take it or leave it for what it is. It all started on October 24th. I was hanging out in the Misty Mountain chat room, just killing time and chatting with some friends. Let's call them Bluefin, Free Roamer, Swifty, and Zephyr. Typical online nicknames. I was planning to hit the hay early because of a meeting the next day, but out of the blue, Zephyr hits me up with, "Hey, let's go grab some drinks." I laughed it off. Drinks? You do realize it's almost midnight, right? Come on, my treat, he insisted. Tempting, but with work early the next day, I tried to decline politely. Free Roamer joined in. "Come on, when have we ever steered you wrong? It'll be fun." After a bit of back and forth, I caved, telling everyone in the chat I was heading out for a bit. By mistake, I pinged the chatbot built into our server. We called it Old Sam for some reason. To my surprise, Old Sam responded with, "Take me with you, I want to go too." I chuckled to myself, thinking how far chatbots had come, but shrugged it off and headed out to meet my friends. We ended up hitting a local bar and, well, let's just say the night was long and the drinks were plenty. I stumbled back home around 4 a.m., crashed for a few hours, then dragged myself to work. After a long day, plus unexpected overtime, a co-worker, whom we'll nickname Aurora in the chat, offered to walk out together since it was late. The office building was nearly empty and eerily quiet. I tried to keep the conversation light to distract from the unsettling silence. Just as we reached the ground floor, I tripped over something, or at least felt like I did. Aurora jeered at my clumsiness, and we parted ways outside. Back at home, rejuvenated somehow, I logged back into the Misty Mountain chat room. Immediately, a user named Tomcat greeted me, and we started chatting. Suddenly, he mentioned my stumble in the staircase, and I played along, accusing Aurora of pranking me. But then Tomcat sent a stream of laughter in bold red text, something a chat newbie like him shouldn't have been able to do. Annoyed by what I thought was a spam attack, my screen filled with red, I tried to boot him from the chat, but my entire screen froze, leaving me no choice but to shut down my computer. The next day at work, I confronted Aurora, asking if she was behind the chat prank. She was clueless, leaving me baffled about who or what was messing with me. That night, as I was the last to leave the office, a chill ran down my spine when I heard a faint humming sound and tripped again in the same spot as before. This time, fear overpowered my embarrassment. I rushed out, hopped into a cab, and didn't look back. Once home, I couldn't resist checking the chat room, and there Tomcat was, taunting me about my fall. My head spun as red text flooded my screen before my computer crashed again. Just before I could process what happened, a cold draft sent shivers down my spine. I turned to see nothing but felt an ominous presence. I didn't log back into that chat for a few days. When I finally did, Zephyr mentioned how strange I'd been acting talking to old Sam and causing a stir. I decided to take a break from being the chat admin and handed the reins over to Zephyr, thinking maybe a break from the digital world would do me good. A few days later, I heard they replaced old Sam with a new bot. No strange occurrences since then, but I can't shake off the feeling that our digital footprint can sometimes attract more attention than we bargained for, not all of it human. So yeah, there's my story. Nothing supernatural, just a series of strange, unnerving coincidences with technology. Or at least that's what I keep telling myself.